The silence was the first thing that hit you, not the silence of the grave, but a deep, heavy quiet that settles over a place where a terrible truth has been buried alive. It was the silence of a house that had swallowed a dark secret, slowly digesting it over the years, until even the wood seemed to groan under its weight. And within that silence, a question lingered, a whisper no one dared to speak aloud, yet everyone could feel. Why him? Why, out of all the souls working under the harsh Virginia sun, was one young man taken from the fields and brought into the master's house? The answer was never spoken, never written down, not even hinted at, in the quiet talks behind closed doors. It was a choice made in the suffocating heat of an antebellum summer, a decision that would tear apart a family, expose a legacy built on fragile ground, and forever change the life of Elias, the chosen one. His story is not one of freedom, nor of simple servitude, but of a man forced to live at the very center of a lie, where the air was thick with unspoken histories, and the shadows carried more truth than the light. And as we move deeper into the suffocating closeness of that house, you may find yourself asking, just as Elias did, what unspeakable horror could drive a master to make such a choice, and why, even to this day, the reason was never recorded. Before we go further into the story of Elias and Edmund Hatcher, if you are new here, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. The year was 1847, and the air in Pittsylvania County, Virginia, hung thick and damp, heavy with the smell of ripening tobacco and the silent burden of generations. The Hatcher plantation, known as Oakwood, stretched across nearly 2,000 acres, its fields forming a patchwork of green and brown that reached toward the horizon, broken only by the dark, brooding line of distant woods. At its center stood the main house, a grand two-story building of whitewashed brick, its tall columns rising like silent guards, its windows looking out with a quiet, almost sorrowful dignity. It was a house built on ambition, on the labor of enslaved people, and on a particular kind of Southern pride that hid many sins. For decades, Oakwood had been a cornerstone of the county, its master, Edmund Hatcher, a man of strong presence, his name tied to prosperity and an iron will. He was a man whose gaze could weaken a lesser soul, whose voice, though rarely raised, carried the weight of absolute command. Yet even in his earlier years, there had always been a certain hollowness to his face, a shadow in his eyes that suggested a deeper, more personal struggle, a secret slowly eating away at him from within. Now, at 58, a widower for nearly 10 years, that shadow had grown deeper, carving lines of fatigue and something close to despair around his mouth. He moved through his large home like a ghost. His presence felt more than seen, a quiet, brooding force that filled every corner of Oakwood. Elias, at 22, knew only the fields. His world had been shaped by the steady swing of the hoe, the sharp, bitter smell of tobacco leaves, the relentless sun beating down on his back, and the shared hardship among those in the slave quarters. He was a man of quiet strength, his body lean and hardened from years of labor, his hands rough, his face marked by the early signs of a life lived under pressure. But beneath that surface, Elias had a sharp mind that set him apart, an observant nature that took in every detail of the world around him. He spoke little, but his dark eyes missed nothing, storing away what he saw with careful attention despite his lack of formal learning. His mother, Nora, had been a field worker, a woman of quiet grace and strong love, who died when Elias was only 12, leaving him with little more than a fading memory of her gentle touch and the lasting pain of her loss. He remembered her stories, whispered late at night in their small cabin, stories of strength and hope, but also of the harsh truths of their lives. Her death had not made him bitter, but it had given him a quiet determination to survive, to endure, and to remain unbroken. His closest companion in the quarters was Abner, an older enslaved man, perhaps around 60, whose skin was worn like old leather and whose eyes held the wisdom of many seasons. Abner had seen generations rise and fall, had watched masters come and go, and understood the complex, often cruel balance between power and submission. He was a quiet man as well, but his silence was different from Elias's. It was the silence of someone who knew that careless words could bring danger, Abner often shared what he knew through small stories, subtle looks, and quiet gestures. After Nora's death, he had taken Elias under his guidance, teaching him the ways of the land, the unwritten rules of survival, and the importance of keeping one's thoughts guarded. Elias respected Abner deeply, seeing in him a deep understanding of a world that went beyond their forced reality. Life in the quarters stood in sharp contrast to the main house. The cabins, simple and rough, were grouped closely together, their dirt floors kept as clean as possible, their few belongings arranged with care. The air carried the smell of smoke, cooked greens, and unwashed bodies, mixed with the sounds of children laughing, quiet conversations, and the soft singing of spirituals in the evening light. It was a world of its own, separate yet tightly connected to the house on the hill. Elias moved through it with a calm ease, acknowledged by nods and brief knowing looks. He was one of them, a field worker bound to a life of endless labor, his future as steady as the rising and setting of the sun. He had accepted this life, not with defeat, but with the quiet strength of someone who understood the limits placed upon him. He held no illusions, no grand dreams of escape, only the daily effort to keep his dignity and survive. His inner world, though rich with thought and observation, remained protected, a safe place against the harshness of his reality. He was Elias of the fields, and that was all he had ever known. The idea that this steady rhythm of his life could be broken was unthinkable, too strange to consider. Yet unseen forces, driven by the dark and unspoken wishes of a powerful man, were already moving, ready to pull him away from the land he knew and into the suffocating gilded cage of the master's house. The day everything changed for Elias began like any other. Beneath a wide cloudless sky, the sun pressed down with heavy heat, baking the ground and drawing sweat from every face. The air shimmered above the rows of tobacco, and the steady thud of hoes against the soil was the only sound competing with the loud hum of cicadas. Elias worked deep in the field, his back sore, his muscles burning, his mind focused on the task, a kind of calm born from repetition. He moved with practiced skill, his eyes scanning the wide leaves for any sign of damage or disease, his hands carefully picking and trimming. Fine red dust covered his skin, mixing with sweat and settling into his clothes. Then something shifted. A ripple move ebbed through the field. The noise faded, not all at once, but slowly, like a wave pulling back from the shore. Heads began to turn, cautious and quiet, toward the edge of the field where the path from the main house met the crops. Elias, sensing the change, paused, resting his hoe against his shoulder. He followed their gaze, and his breath caught. Standing at the edge of their world was Edmund Hatcher. He was not alone. Beside him stood his son, Thomas Hatcher, a man of 30, his face already shaped by impatience and inherited authority. Thomas, with his pale complexion and constantly narrowed eyes, was cruel in the casual way of those who had never known hardship. He oversaw the daily work of the plantation, and his presence in the fields usually meant harsh words or quick punishment. But today, his expression showed not anger, but clear displeasure, a tight frown deepening the lines on his face. Behind them stood the foreman, Mr. Davies, a large white man whose usual confidence had been replaced by visible unease. Edmund Hatcher, however, drew all attention. Despite his age, he stood tall, his posture still strong, though his shoulders seemed burdened by something unseen. He wore a clean white linen suit, standing out sharply against the dusty land, a striking contrast to the dirt-covered clothes of the workers. His eyes, usually distant, now moved slowly across the rows of men and women, studying them in a way that felt deliberate and unsettling. The silence grew heavier, almost painful, broken only by the distant call of a crow and the fast beating of Elias's heart. Everyone in that field knew that when the master came in person, it was never without reason, and rarely a good one. Edmund's gaze stopped. It lingered. Then, with slow purpose, he lifted his arm, extending his finger. He was not pointing at the crops or a task. He was pointing directly at Elias. A cold fear spread through Elias's body. He stood still, unable to understand. He glanced around, hoping the finger would move, that it was meant for someone else. But it stayed fixed on him. The foreman stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Master Hatcher, is there an issue with Elias's work?" Edmund did not lower his hand. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost quiet, yet it carried clearly across the field. "No issue, Davies. Elias, you will come with me. You will work in the house now. No explanation, no reason, just a command, final and unquestionable." Thomas shifted, clearly uncomfortable, a low sound escaping him. "Father, with respect, Elias is a field hand. He knows nothing of house duties. We have Ruth and the others." Edmund's sharp, cold eyes turned to Thomas, cutting him off mid-sentence. "My decision, Thomas. It is made." The words were not a request, but more like a dismissal of any argument. Thomas went quiet, his face a mask of barely hidden anger. The other slaves in the field stayed still, their faces unreadable, but Elias felt the weight of their gaze, a heavy silence that was not of surprise, but of something older, something closer to dread. They knew deep inside that such a choice made without explanation was rarely a blessing. It was a mark, a separation, a step into an unknown that could be far more dangerous than the familiar struggles of the fields. Elias felt their pity, their fear, and maybe even a hint of dark curiosity. He was being singled out, and in their world, to be singled out often meant being marked for a fate no one wished for. Elias slowly lowered his hoe to the ground. His legs felt heavy, as if tied to the earth. He took a deep breath, the air suddenly tasting sharp and strange. He looked toward Abner, who stood a few rows away, his face calm and controlled. But in Abner's eyes, Elias caught a flicker of deep concern, a quiet warning. "Come, Elias," Edmund Hatcher said, his voice softer now, almost inviting, a tone Elias had never heard directed at him before. It was more unsettling than any order. Elias walked forward, his step stiff, his mind filled with confusion and fear. He left behind the familiar smell of tobacco and dust, the steady rhythm of shared work, and moved toward the tall figure of the master, toward the grand house that had always felt distant and untouchable. As he passed Thomas, he felt the younger man's hostile stare, a clear wave of resentment that hinted at trouble ahead. The walk to the house felt unreal. The world seemed off balance. The sounds of the fields faded, replaced by the crunch of gravel underfoot, the soft rustle of leaves in the trimmed gardens, and the uneasy quiet of the master's space. He was taken through a side entrance into the cool, dim interior of the house, a place he had only seen from far away. The air inside felt different, cooler, heavier, filled with the scent of beeswax, old paper, and something hard to name. Something that spoke of secrets and long-held stories. Ruth, a house slave in her mid-30s, her face showing both worry and a strange guarded kindness, met them in the back hallway. She had worked inside the house for years, her movements quiet and careful, her eyes used to seeing everything while pretending to see nothing. She was a woman who understood the silent rules of the house, and her presence now showed how serious Elias's new situation was. "Ruth, show Elias to his room," Edmund Hatcher ordered, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet hall. "He will attend me personally. Make sure he understands his duties." Ruth nodded, her eyes meeting Elias's for a brief moment, a silent message passing between them. A warning, an understanding, a reminder of how fragile his new place was. She led him down a narrow, dim hallway. From the grand rooms and toward the back of the house. The floor creaked softly under their steps, each sound louder in the silence. His room was small, barely larger than a closet, hidden off the back hallway, only a few steps from the master's private study. It had a narrow bed, a small wooden chest, and one high window that showed only a thin slice of sky. It was clean, simple, and completely empty of personal feeling. It was a space meant for use, for someone who was meant to stay unseen, unheard, yet always ready. "This is where you'll sleep," Ruth whispered, her voice low, almost secretive. "You'll be close to Master Hatcher's study. He likes to call on you at any hour." Her eyes held a deep, uneasy knowing. "You listen, you learn, you keep quiet, and you watch." Elias nodded, his throat tight, unable to speak. He looked around the small room, feeling the walls press in on him, The air felt heavy, carrying the faint smell of old wood, and something else, something cold and sharp, like fear. That first night inside the house was difficult. The sounds were strange, louder in the darkness. The creak of boards above, the distant chime of a clock, the rustle of leaves outside, the soft, almost hidden murmur of voices from other parts of the house. He lay on the bed, his body tense, his mind racing, trying to understand the strange decision that had pulled him from his old life. He felt like a bird trapped in a fine cage, the bars unseen but still real. He could sense the house around him, almost alive, filled with secrets. Then he heard it, a soft, nearly silent sound from the master's study just beyond his wall. A sigh, the faint clink of glass, and then a long silence. Elias knew with a cold certainty that Edmund Hatcher was awake, just like him. And he also knew that the master was watching him, even through the walls, with a focus that had no clear name, an intensity that promised a future far more complex and frightening than anything he had known in the sunlit fields. The reason for his selection remained an empty, frightening mystery, a question hanging over him, and the silence of the house seemed to mock his need for answers. Weeks turned into months, each day inside the house slowly pulling apart Elias's old life. The rhythm of the house was very different from the fields, a quiet and careful pattern of duties and unspoken rules. Elias learned fast, his sharp awareness helping him. His main role was to serve Edmund Hatcher directly, laying out his clothes, preparing his morning tea, serving meals, and most often taking care of his private study. He became like a shadow, moving through the large, echoing rooms with quiet skill, almost unseen, yet always present. He learned the layout of the house, the creaking floors, the drafts that moved through long halls, the way sunlight shifted through tall windows during the day. He learned the smells, the faint, sweet decay of old flowers, the sharp scent of polish, the dusty smell of old books, and the ever-present smoke of Edmund Hatcher's pipe. But more than the physical space, Elias learned the emotional atmosphere of the Hatcher family, a place as dangerous and uncertain as any wild land. Clara Hatcher, Edmund's daughter, was a woman of 24, her beauty touched with a deep sadness that seemed to stay with her like a shadow. She moved quietly through the house, her eyes often far away, lost in her own thoughts. Elias often saw her in the mornings, sitting by a window with a book open, though she rarely seemed to read it. Her education, unusual for a woman of her time, seemed to have made her more aware of her own confinement. Sometimes she would give Elias a small nod, a slight sign of recognition that no other white member of the house gave. Yet, it was always Père D, with a look of deep pity, as if she saw her own trapped life reflected in his. Thomas Hatcher, however, did not hide his anger. His cruelty, once aimed at the field workers, now turned more directly toward Elias. He would complain without reason, give confusing orders, and sometimes just stand and stare at Elias, with a quiet hatred that could almost be felt in the air. Elias understood that Thomas saw him not just as a servant, but as an unwanted presence, a sign of his father's strange favor, and a threat to his place as heir. Thomas's eyes, when they met Elias's, were always cold, always calculating, promising punishment for something Elias had not done, but simply represented. Mrs. Dorothea Price, the housekeeper, a white woman in her late 50s, was a strong and serious presence. She had served the Hatcher family for over 20 years, her knowledge of the house and its people deep and detailed. Her face showed years of control, her eyes sharp but guarded. She moved with a stiff dignity, her apron softly rustling as she worked. Mrs. Price was skilled in silence, a woman who knew that survival in this house sometimes meant hiding what you knew. She watched Elias with both suspicion and a strange, almost caring concern. Her instructions were always clear, her warnings short and often unclear, hinting at deeper truths beneath the surface. She held many secrets, and Elias sensed that her knowledge went far beyond daily duties. But it was Edmund Hatcher who remained the most troubling figure in Elias's new life. The master's habits became steady, yet still unsettling. Every night, without fail, Edmund would go to his private study, locking the heavy door behind him. Elias would hear the soft click, a sound that marked the line between the master's public and private world. Inside, Edmund would drink, often late into the night, the sound of glass, and the occasional heavy sigh, the only things that could be heard through the walls. On the wall above the fireplace in the study hung a portrait. It showed a woman, her features soft but strong, her eyes bright in a way that seemed to follow Elias as he worked. She was beautiful, dressed simply but elegantly, her dark hair pulled back neatly. No one in the house ever spoke her name. It was just the portrait, a silent and graceful presence that watched over Edmund's lonely hours. Elias often saw Edmund staring at it, his face filled with deep sorrow, a raw emotion rarely seen in him. Most unsettling of all was the way Edmund would sometimes stop suddenly, his attention shifting from whatever he was doing to focus on Elias. It was not anger, nor a simple order. It was a deep, almost obsessive stare, an expression that had no place in the usual world between master and servant. It was a look of deep thought, of searching, as if Edmund was trying to find something in Elias's face, something he had lost, or maybe something he truly wished to see. Elias would stand still, his heart beating fast, feeling the weight of that stare, the silent questions behind it. He learned to keep his own face calm, his eyes lowered, showing nothing of the storm inside. He became like a blank surface, a mirror that gave nothing back to the master, hoping to avoid the disturbing strength of that gaze. Elias, with his sharp and observant mind, started to keep a mental note of everything, the slight changes in Mrs. Price's voice, the way Clara's eyes would rest on the portrait, the bitterness in Thomas's tone, and most of all, the master's troubling stare. He slowly joined these pieces together like a puzzle forming in his thoughts, though the full image still stayed hidden, covered by the house's heavy silence. One Sunday, during the short rest given to the enslaved, Elias managed to slip away to the quarters. He found Abner sitting outside his cabin, carving a piece of wood, his movements slow and careful. Elias sat beside him. The familiar smell of wood smoke and earth felt comforting after the scented air of the house. He spoke little, but Abner, with his deep understanding, sensed the change in him. "Boy," Abner said, his voice low and steady, not looking up from his work, "you've been chosen for something." He paused, the knife cutting a thin curl from the wood. "And nothing that man chooses comes without a cost." Elias looked at the old man, his eyes searching. "What do you mean, Abner?" Abner finally raised his head, his old eyes meeting Elias's. "That house, it is not just brick and wood. It has its own kind of hunger. And Master Hatcher, he carries his own kind of ghosts. You are in there now, Elias. You are not just serving him. You are serving his secrets. And secrets, boy, they always demand a price." He went back to his carving, the message given clear and cold. Elias returned to the house that evening, Abner's words repeating in his mind. He was not just a servant. He was a witness. He was not just living in the house. He was living inside its secrets. And the master's gaze, once only unsettling, now felt like a mark, branding him as part of a story he did not yet understand. A story that promised to be far darker than anything he could have imagined. The silence of the house, once just heavy, now felt alive, like a suffocating blanket made from years of unspoken truths. And Elias, now at its center, began to feel its crushing pressure. The turning moment came on a Tuesday, a day that began like any other, yet ended with Elias's world completely changed. Edmund Hatcher had gone into town for a meeting with the county magistrate, a rare absence that left the house with a strange, almost noticeable lightness. Elias was given his usual work in the study, dusting the heavy wooden desk, polishing the brass items and arranging the piles of ledgers and letters. The room, usually filled with the master's heavy presence, felt unusually empty, almost exposed. As Elias carefully wiped the desk, his cloth caught on something. He looked down. A small decorated drawer, usually kept locked, was slightly open, just enough to catch the light. Edmund, in his hurry, had left it unlocked. A shiver passed through Elias. He knew at once that this was a line he should not cross, a forbidden place. Yet the strong pull of the unknown, the deep need to understand the master's strange gaze and the house's silence, was too powerful to ignore. Abner's words, Nothing that man chooses comes without a cost, echoed in his mind. He felt a strong sense of fear, but also a sharp, almost reckless curiosity. His heart beat loudly in his chest as he looked around the empty room, then down the quiet hallway. No one. He took a deep, unsteady breath, and with shaking fingers, slowly pulled the drawer open more. Inside, beneath a layer of old papers, lay a small bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were not official records, not business papers. These were personal, private, their edges worn with time. Elias gently, almost with respect, picked up the bundle. The paper felt weak and fragile, as if it could fall apart in his hands. He untied the ribbon, his fingers slightly unsteady. The letters were written in a neat flowing style, the ink faded brown. He noticed the dates: 1825, 1827, 1830, 1831. They were old, from before he was even born. He looked at the first one, his eyes quickly reading the elegant writing. It was addressed to my dearest Edmund, and signed only with an initial, N. A cold feeling spread through Elias. N. The letter stirred something deep in his memory, a faint echo from his childhood. He knew that letter. He had seen it bereft, or carved into a small, smooth stone his mother had kept hidden among her few belongings. Nora, his mother. He began to read, his breath tightening. Every word struck him hard, breaking apart his understanding of the world. The letters spoke of a child, a hidden child, born from a time of desperate hope and forbidden love. They spoke of a promise Edmund had made, a promise of safety, of a future that would never come. They spoke of a woman who clearly knew she would never leave the plantation alive, that her fate was sealed by the secret she carried. One letter from 1827 stood out, its words burning into Elias's mind. My dearest Edmund, I write again, though I know these words may never reach your heart, only your hands. The child grows inside me, a living sign of our mistake, our brief stolen moments. You promised, Edmund. You promised he would be safe, that he would live a life beyond the fields. But I see the truth now. I see the fear in your eyes, the shame. You will not claim him. You cannot. And I know my place. I know what will happen to me and to him. If this truth ever comes to light, protect him, Edmund. If not for me, then for the part of you that lives within him. Do not let him suffer his mother's fate. I pray for his soul and for yours, though I fear yours is already lost in the darkness you have chosen. Elias's hands shook so badly, he nearly dropped the letter. The words blurred before his eyes, but their meaning was clear and terrifying. The child grows inside me. He would live beyond the fields, the part of you that lives within him. And then the crushing truth. Do not let him suffer his mother's fate, his mother, Nora, and the child. Him, Elias. The air in the study suddenly felt thin and tight. The portrait above the fireplace, the woman with bright eyes, seemed to look down at him with quiet sadness. He looked at her closely and saw a faint raise. Semblance to his mother, a shared strength in her face, a similar depth in her eyes. Was this the woman Edmund truly loved, or just a reminder of a love he had betrayed? He did not take the letters. He did not even think of it. The weight of their truth was too great to carry. With careful movements, his hands still shaking, he folded the letter, placed it back with the others, and tied the faded blue ribbon exactly as before. He gently returned the bundle to the drawer, pushing it closed until it softly clicked. Then he wiped the desk again, his actions automatic, his thoughts spinning. He finished his work for the day, but everything in the study now felt different, filled with a dark new meaning. The heavy desk, the old books, even the air itself seemed to carry the secret. He moved through the rest of the day like a shadow, his body doing its work while his mind replayed the words of the letter, the terrible truth of N. That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay on his small bed, staring at the thin line of moonlight through his window. The sounds of the house, once strange, now felt like quiet whispers. Every creak, every distant sound seemed to confirm the truth he had discovered. Edmund Hatcher's gaze, his strange choice, the silence of the house, it all came together into one terrifying realization. He was not just a slave chosen for service. He was a secret placed at the center of the man who had created him, a living proof of a betrayal that had lasted for years. He was the child of Nora, the child of Edmund Hatcher. And the reason he was brought into the house was not kindness, not usefulness, but a desperate and twisted attempt by his father to keep that living memory close, a constant reminder of a broken promise, a ruined life, and a truth that could destroy everything if ever spoken aloud. The first shadow had fallen, and Elias knew with a cold certain why that his life and the lives of everyone in that house would never be the same. The truth from the letters, the clear reality of who he was, did not burst inside him. Instead, it settled slowly, like a cold, heavy stone deep inside him, spreading through every part of his being. He now saw everything through a new, frightening lens. Edmund Hatcher's attention, once only unsettling, was no longer random. It was not kindness or simple usefulness. It was the stare of a man who was haunted, a man who could not stop looking at the face of a woman he had wronged, a woman now gone, a face he saw each time he looked at the son he had never accepted. Elias was not just a servant, he was a living, breathing accusation, a constant, quiet reminder of Edmund's deepest shame. The whole structure of the house took on a darker meaning. The tall columns, the shining floors, the heavy curtains, they were not just signs of wealth, but a carefully built mask, hiding a lie. The silence that filled Oakwood was no longer just the calm of a well-managed home. It was a choking silence of complicity, of unspoken truths, of a secret so deep it had twisted the lives of everyone inside its walls. Elias felt as if he were living inside a grave, where the air was thick with ghosts from the past, and he, the unrecognized son, was the strongest ghost of all. He began to watch the others more closely, searching for proof, for any hint that they also knew, and slowly, quietly, the pieces started to come together. Ruth, the house slave, who had watched his arrival with both sympathy and fear, now seemed to look at him with deeper sadness. In small bits, in soft whispers, when they were alone in the pantry or laundry room, she began to confirm what Elias had suspected. Nora, she wasn't always in the fields, you know, Ruth whispered one afternoon, her eyes nervously glancing toward the door. There was a time, long before you were born, she worked in the house, a seamstress. He liked her work. Ruth's words were careful and hidden, but the meaning hung heavy in the air. She spoke of a time when things were different, a time before the current Mrs. Hatcher, a time when Nora had been closer to the master, when the line between master and enslaved woman had blurred in the dangerous closeness of the house. Ruth never said more, but her knowing looks and sudden silences said enough. She had either seen it or heard the whispers from those who had. Mrs. Price, the housekeeper, with her tightly controlled face, now seemed to carry an even heavier weight. Elias noticed how her eyes would sometimes rest on him, a flicker of guilt or regret in her usually calm expression. She would sigh at times, a deep, tired sound, especially when Edmund grew distant or when Thomas became cruel. Elias understood that Mrs. Price knew. She had been with the family for many years, a silent witness to everything, a keeper of the house's darkest secrets. Her silence was not just habit, it was protection, a way to survive in a house built on lies. Even Dr. Nathaniel Graves, the family doctor who visited from time to time, seemed to hold part of the secret. Elias saw how the doctor would sometimes exchange a quick, almost invisible glance with Edmund, a look that needed no words. He noticed the doctor's discomfort when Nora's name was accidentally mentioned by an older field hand, a slight tightening of his jaw. Dr. Graves, a man of science and quiet manners, clearly knew the family's hidden past, his knowledge going beyond the body into the deeper wounds of the Hatcher household. And Thomas, his growing anger toward Elias now made a chilling kind of sense. Thomas knew, or at least suspected. His cruelty was not just the usual harshness of a master, but the sharp hatred of a man who saw a living insult to his own place, a constant reminder of his father's mistake. His hatred came from deep insecurity, a fear that his inheritance, his claim to the Hatcher name, was somehow stained by the presence of his unacknowledged half-brother. Clara, Edmund's daughter, with her quiet sadness, also began to make more sense. Her learning, her silent resistance against the rules of her world, now seemed tied to the house's secret. Elias remembered her small nods, her looks of deep pity. He realized she had been trying in her own quiet way to protect him, to offer comfort, without ever being able to explain why. She too was trapped by the secret, a prisoner of her father's shame, and her sadness came from carrying a truth she could never speak. The weight of this knowledge, this shared silence, pressed heavily on Elias. He walked through the house doing his duties, but his mind was full of thoughts, grief for his mother, anger toward Edmund, a deep sense of injustice, and a cold fear for his future. He was no longer just Elias from the fields. He was Elias, the secret, the living proof of Edmund Hatcher's sin. One evening, as daylight faded into night, Edmund Hatcher called Elias into the study. The air was thick, filled with the smell of whiskey and pipe smoke. Edmund sat in his tall leather chair, a glass in his hand, his face half hidden by the dim light of a single lamp. Elias stood before him, his heart beating hard, knowing this was not a simple task. This was something else. This was the moment. Edmund drank slowly, the ice softly tapping the glass. He did not look at Elias. His eyes stayed on the fire, and the silence stretched long and painful, broken only by the crackling flames and distant crickets. Elias waited, his face calm, his body still, ready for woe. Whatever truth might come. When Edmund finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, almost a whisper, but he did not speak directly. Not about the letters, not about Nora, not about the truth. He spoke around it, in the careful, indirect way of men who cannot say what they mean, who are too full of pride and shame to speak the words that might free them. "This land, Elias," Edmund began quietly, "it is more than soil and crops. It is a legacy, a name. It is what a man leaves behind." He paused, taking another long drink. "My father built this from nothing, and I have kept it, improved it, added to it." His eyes finally moved, not to Elias's face, but to his hands, rough and strong. A man owes something to what he has made, to his name, to his blood. Elias listened, his thoughts racing, trying to understand the hidden meaning. Edmund was speaking of legacy, of blood, of duty. He was speaking of Elias without ever saying it. He was admitting the connection, the shared blood, without ever saying son or father. "There are obligations," Edmund continued, his voice fading slightly, as if the words were heavy, "to the past, to the future, to order." He gestured weakly around the room, at the books and records, the signs of his controlled world. Order must be kept, at all costs. Elias said nothing. He stood still, silent, taking in every word, every pause, every hidden truth. He understood. Edmund was not confessing. He was defending himself. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was asking to be understood for the choices he had made, the order he had protected, even at the cost of a life, even at the cost of his own soul. He was recognizing Elias's existence, his place in the family, but only within the limits of the system, the same system that had denied him his name, his freedom, his rightful place. When Edmund finally dismissed him with a tired wave, Elias turned and left the study, the heavy door closing softly behind him. But something had changed between them. A silent understanding, a recognition without words. The silence that once stood between them was now something shared, a suffocating closeness, built on a terrible unspoken truth. Elias knew with cold certainty that he was not just living in the house. He was living inside Edmund Hatcher's conscience, a constant reminder, a living ghost of a past that refused to disappear. The weight of this silence, this deep shared secret, was almost too much to bear, and Elias knew it would only grow heavier with time. If this story is already making you uneasy, you're not alone. Hit that like button to show you're still here. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and send this video to someone who enjoys dark history. Now, back to the house on the hill. In the months that followed, the silent understanding from the study became the most dangerous thing Elias had faced. The fragile balance between him and Edmund seemed to make others more restless, especially Thomas. The house, once quietly oppressive, now felt like it was ready to break under the pressure of its secrets. Thomas Hatcher, his face often red with anger and drink, began to act openly against Elias. His accusations became stronger, his cruelty sharper. He would blame Elias for small thefts, a missing spoon, a lost record, even though they were lies. He would give Elias impossible work, then punish him for failing. His goal was clear: to send Elias back to the fields, or even sell him away, removing the threat to his own place. "He's insolent, father," Thomas would shout during meals, his eyes locked on Elias. "He's not fit for housework. He belongs with the others." But Edmund would only sigh, tired and distant, and wave his hand, always protecting Elias, always keeping him close. This only made Thomas more furious. Elias learned to expect these attacks, to handle them with quiet strength, knowing any reaction would only give Thomas what he wanted. He moved carefully through the house, alert at all times. Every shadow felt dangerous, every corner a possible trap. Dr. Nathaniel Graves began to visit more often. Edmund's health, already weak, seemed to worsen quickly. His thin frame became more noticeable, his cough deeper and harsher. During one visit, Elias, bringing water to the study, overheard part of a conversation that sent a chill through him. The door was slightly open, and Dr. Graves's usually calm voice carried a rare urgency. "Edmund, Doctor," Graves said softly, his tone serious. "You cannot keep him here forever. It is unnatural and dangerous for everyone involved." Edmund's reply came as a low, rough growl. "He stays. He is mine to keep." "But the consequences, Edmund. The danger if word ever spread, if anyone ever truly put the pieces together." "Doctor," Graves's voice faded, but the unspoken meaning lingered heavily in the room. "If anyone knew he was your son, you made a choice years ago to keep him near, not to free him, not to acknowledge him, just close, like a secret you cannot destroy. But secrets have a way of rotting, Edmund. They poison everything." Elias froze, the bucket of water heavy in his hands. He heard Edmund's deep sigh, then the faint clink of glass. "I know the dangers, Nathaniel. I live with them every day, but I cannot send him away. Not now." The conversation ended suddenly, as Edmund coughed, a harsh rattling sound. Elias quickly stepped back, his mind spinning. Dr. Graves's words confirmed everything. Edmund had made a deliberate decision years ago to keep Elias close, to keep him within sight, a living punishment, a constant reminder of his sin, but never to truly accept him. It was a twisted kind of possession, a desperate effort to control a truth he could not face. The house, already full of secrets, began to show deeper cracks. Mrs. Price, the stern housekeeper who had carried the burden of the Hatcher family's hidden past for decades, slowly began to fall apart. The strain of what she knew, the constant watchfulness needed to keep the illusion alive, was finally wearing her down. Her movements became less exact, her silences more fragile. She began to make small errors, to forget little things. Her eyes often looked far away, troubled. One afternoon, Elias found her in the pantry, her hands shaking as she polished a silver tray. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with a desperate, almost frantic fear. "It's all coming apart, Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The house, it is sick. And the master, he is losing control." She spoke of Nora, not directly, but in careful hints pointing to the injustice, the betrayal, the terrible price paid for Edmund's pride. She spoke of the portrait, of the letters, of the child. She spoke of a decision made long ago, a decision that had poisoned everything. Elias listened, his heart heavy. He knew Mrs. Price was close to breaking, that the weight of her knowledge was becoming too much. He tried to offer quiet comfort, a steady presence, but he knew it would not help. The house was truly sick, and its sickness was spreading. A week later, Mrs. Price was found dead in her bed. The official cause given by Dr. Graves was a sudden heart condition, but Elias knew better. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the way she had been close to revealing too much. He had heard the quiet, urgent talks between Edmund and Thomas in the days before her death. He knew with a cold certainty that Mrs. Price had been incest, not with open violence perhaps, but with careful, unseen pressure, a fear so deep it had stopped her heart. Her death was a harsh reminder that the secret that made him chosen also made him dangerous. He was not safe. The truth he carried was a weapon, and those who knew it or threatened to reveal it paid the highest price. Clara Hatcher, her face pale and tired, found Elias in the garden one evening, her voice low and urgent. "Elias," she said, her eyes wide with real fear, "you must be careful, more careful than ever before. My father, he is capable of anything to protect his name. And Thomas, he is like a snake." She looked around nervously as if afraid someone might hear them. "Mrs. Price, her death was no accident. Not truly. She knew too much. And now you are the one who knows." Her hand, usually so gentle, gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Be careful, Elias, for your own sake, for Nora's sake." Her words, spoken with such raw and unusual fear, confirmed his darkest thoughts. Clara, too, was truly afraid, not just for herself, but for him, and the cracks in the house were growing wider. Elias knew the ground beneath him was becoming more and more unstable. He was living on borrowed time, a pawn in a deadly game, and the truth he carried was like a ticking bomb, ready to break apart the entire structure of Oakwood. The death of Mrs. Price, quick and disturbingly convenient, strengthened Elias's understanding of the true nature of the house and the man who ruled it. The secret was not just a burden. It was something alive, something that demanded sacrifice, and Elias, the unacknowledged son, was now at its center. He understood that his knowledge was not only power, but also a deep weakness. He could not speak it, he could not act on it. The law, the society, the harsh system of Virginia in 1855 made the truth he carried not only unspeakable, but deadly. Why? To reveal it would bring destruction, not just to Edmund, but to himself, to Clara, to anyone who dared to challenge the order. He moved through his days with a deep sense of isolation. The other house slaves, sensing the change in the house's mood, avoided him, their looks uneasy, their whispers quiet. He was marked, set apart not only by Edmund's decision, but by the terrible truth he now carried. One afternoon, while cleaning Edmund's study, his eyes caught a loose floorboard beneath the master's heavy desk. It was almost impossible to notice a slight change in the wood, a thin gap. His heart began to race. He remembered the letters, the hidden drawer. He knelt down, his fingers tracing the edge of the board. With careful, steady movements, he lifted it. Beneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a single document. It was a legal paper, its surface yellowed with age, its ink faded. Elias slowly unrolled it. It was a deed of manumission, a paper that would have legally freed Elias, and even more shocking, acknowledged his parentage. The names were there, clear and undeniable. Elias, son of Nora and of Edmund Hatcher. The date was 1835, when Elias would have been 10 years old, but it was unsigned, unfiled, never completed. Edmund Hatcher had written it, he had held it, he had thought about it, and then he had hidden it away, unable to destroy it, but also unable to act on it. It was proof of his deep inner conflict, his struggle between a small voice of conscience and the crushing weight of pride, shame, and society. He could not bring himself to accept his son, to destroy the carefully built image of his life, to risk the scandal that would follow. But he also could not bring himself to erase the truth completely. So he buried it, like so many other truths, beneath the floorboards of his study, a silent and painful sign of his cowardice and his twisted attachment to tea. His secret. Elias held the document, the paper softly rustling, like a ghost of a different future. He thought of his mother, Nora, her quiet strength, her deep love, her desperate wish in the letters for her son to live a life beyond the fields. He thought of the 22 years of his life, lived in the shadow of a secret that had always been about him, a truth that had shaped his life without him knowing. He thought of the injustice, the deep and crushing injustice of it all. This piece of paper, this unsigned document, represented everything he had been denied. Everything his mother had hoped for him, a wave of grief mixed with a cold, burning anger filled him. He could have been free. He could have had a name, a recognized family. He could have had a life. But Edmund Hatcher, his father, had chosen shame over honor, pride over justice, silence over truth. He stood there for a long time, the document in his hands, its weight overwhelming. He could take it. He could expose Edmund. He could destroy the house, the family, the carefully built world of Oakwood. But what would it bring him? A brief moment of chaos followed by what? Revenge. A life on the run. The breaking of Clara's fragile peace. The confirmation of Thomas's darkest fears. In this world, in this time, a black man, even one with a white father, had no true justice. The truth, in this world, would not set him free. It would only destroy. With a heavy heart, Elias carefully folded the document, placed it back in its oilcloth, and returned it beneath the floorboard. He pushed the board back into place, making sure it looked untouched, leaving no sign behind. He said nothing. He told no one. But something inside him had changed, forever. The silence he carried was no longer someone else's burden or shame. It was now his own choice. He had seen the truth, held it, and chosen to bury it again, not out of fear, but from a deep understanding of the world he lived in. He would carry this truth not as a weapon, but as protection, a quiet knowledge that would guide him. The weight of the truth was heavy, but Elias, shaped by the secrets of Oakwood, was now strong enough to carry it. He knew that some battles are not fought with words or papers, but with silent strength. Just when we thought we understood what Edmund Hatcher was hiding, the truth reveals itself as something far darker than we imagined. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who enjoys dark mysteries. Press the like button to support our work, and do not forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let us find out together what happens next. The year 1861 arrived like a storm, dark and threatening, bringing the distant sound of cannons and the cold winds of war. The fragile peace that had hidden the deep cracks in American society finally broke, and within the Hatcher household, everything began to fall apart. The Civil War had begun, and its harsh reality started tearing at the very foundation of Oakwood. The plantation, once a sign of wealth and order, slowly began to break. The fields, once carefully tended, began to show signs of neglect as the workforce slowly declined. Some fled toward the north, while others were forced into service for the Confederate cause. The sounds of distant clashes, along with rumors of battles won and lost, filled the air, replacing the familiar rhythm of plantation life with a constant feeling of fear. Thomas Hatcher, driven by a strong mix of Southern pride, inherited cruelty, and a deep need to prove himself, quickly enlisted with the Confederacy. He rode off to war with dramatic flair, leaving behind debts, a trail of petty cruelty, and a household that quietly felt relief at his absence. His departure, however, left Edmund Hatcher even though alone and exposed, holding tightly to what remained of his authority with a desperate, almost unhealthy grip. Clara Hatcher, on the other hand, saw her quiet resistance turn into active, though hidden, defiance. Her sadness, once silent, now fueled a calm determination. Over the years, she had built a network of contacts, abolitionist supporters in the North, and brave individuals within Virginia who believed in a different future. Under the cover of night, with a quiet courage that did not match her delicate appearance, she began helping several enslaved people from Oakwood and nearby plantations escape north. She guided them to safe houses, offering whatever little help she could spare. Elias, watching her secret movements and hushed talks, understood her purpose, and a silent respect grew between them, a shared awareness of the moral decay that surrounded their world. He never spoke of what he saw, but his quiet understanding brought comfort to Clara, a rare moment of shared truth in a world full of lies. Edmund Hatcher, now older and weakened, seemed to shrink inside his once grand home. The war, the uncertain fate of his son, the falling productivity of his land, and the loss of his social standing all pushed him further into decline. He clung to Elias with an almost desperate need. Elias was no longer just a servant, no longer just a secret. He became a lifeline, a steady presence in a world that was falling apart around Edmund. He was the only one who stayed, the only witness to Edmund's slow and painful downfall. The master's once powerful presence had faded into a fragile, shaking figure. His hands, once firm and commanding, now trembled constantly. His eyes, once sharp and intense, were now filled with deep tiredness and quiet fear. He spent most of his days in the study, drinking heavily, staring at the portrait of the unnamed woman, his mind lost in memories of the past. One dark evening, as the distant sound of cannon fire rolled like thunder across the Virginia land, Edmund Hatcher called Elias into the study. The room was dim, lit only by a weak flickering candle that cast long shadows on the walls. Edmund sat slumped in his chair, his face pale, his breathing shallow. He looked completely broken, a man stripped of pride, power, and purpose. "Elias," Edmund whispered, his voice low and rough with whiskey and despair. He motioned weakly toward the decanter. Elias poured him another drink, his hands steady but his heart heavy. He sensed this was the final unraveling. Edmund drank deeply, then stared at Elias, his eyes wide and almost childlike. "The war, it takes everything. Everything a man builds, everything he believes in." He paused, letting out a long, shaky breath. "My father, he would be ashamed. Ashamed of what I have become, of what this place has turned into." He spoke of Nora, not directly, but through broken hints and unclear sentences that painted a picture of forbidden love, a moment of weakness, and a promise made too quickly and broken in fear. He spoke of the child, of the burden, the shame, the fear of scandal, and the need to protect his name and legacy. It was not a full confession, nor an apology, but a desperate attempt to connect, something he had avoided for 30 years. In these last moments of clarity, he tried to explain, to justify, to free himself from the heavy weight of his secret. She was beautiful, Elias," Edmund whispered, his eyes drifting to the portrait and then back to Elias. "Strong, fierce, like you." He reached out a shaking hand as if to touch Elias but stopped, unable to cross the distance between them. Then, in a moment of painful closeness, a slip of the tongue born from deep despair, Edmund called Elias by his mother's name. "Nora," he breathed softly, his eyes fixed, Ed on Elias, as if seeing her face there. "My Nora." He stopped suddenly, shame flashing across his face. He closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his aged cheek. Elias looked at the old man, his father, in the dim light. He said nothing, not because he had no words, and not because he felt nothing, but because some truths, when spoken in such a world, do not bring freedom. They only destroy. They break fragile peace, awaken anger, and invite punishment from a society built on lies. He understood that Edmund's suffering was his own punishment, a pain greater than anything Elias could give. He understood that his silence was not just a burden, but also protection, a way to survive. He had watched a man fall apart, seen a legacy collapse, and heard the final painful confession of a lifelong secret. He stood there, silent and still, watching the last pieces of Edmund Hatcher's pride fade away, knowing the true cost of the master's choices was not just his own life, but his very soul. The war ended in April 1865, not with a loud victory, but with a tired sigh that spread across the broken land of Virginia. Emancipation, once only whispered, now rang loudly, breaking chains that had lasted generations. For Elias, it was not sudden joy, but a deep, quiet change, as if a heavy, invisible weight had finally been lifted. The world, once strict and limited, now opened before him, wide and uncertain, yet full of the frightening promise of freedom. On a clear morning in late April, under a bright blue sky, Elias walked away from the Hatcher plantation. He took nothing with him, not the letters hidden in the locked drawer, not the unsigned document beneath the floor, not a single object from the house, no memory to carry from its suffocating secrets. He left everything as it was, a silent proof of the truths he had discovered, and the choices he had made. He carried only the clothes on his back, the marks of labor on his hands, and the deep knowledge carved into his soul. He walked away from Oakwood, from the fields, from the house, from the ghosts, and from the man who had been both master and father. He walked toward an unknown future, a free man holding a silence that finally belonged to him. Edmund Hatcher died 6 weeks later in early June, officially from a lung illness. His body had been worn down by years of drinking, despair, and the heavy weight of his hidden sins. His death was quiet, almost unnoticed in the chaos of a defeated South. The house, now truly empty, seemed to release a long breath, its silence turning into a soft, mournful echo. The study was later cleared, its items listed and sold. The locked drawer was found empty. No one knew who had emptied it or when. The letters, the portrait, the hidden paper, all disappeared, lost to history, their secrets either buried forever or carried away by someone who understood their true meaning. Clara Hatcher, finally free after her father's death and the end of the war, left Virginia soon after. She sold what little she had, cut all ties with her past, and vanished into the North, never heard from again in Pennsylvania County. Her quiet resistance had led her to true freedom, a life far from the shadows of Oakwood. Thomas Hatcher returned from the war a broken man, his pride replaced by emptiness. He tried to rebuild the plantation, but the land, like the family, was too damaged to recover. He sold it piece by piece until nothing remained of the once great Oakwood. He too faded into history, his name lost with a defeated cause. The reason Edmund Hatcher allowed Elias to live inside the house was never written anywhere. Not in records, not in church books, not in any surviving letter. It died with him, a secret too painful and dangerous to record or perhaps it left the plantation that April morning, carried in the heart of a man who knew that some stories are better left untold, their power lying in silence rather than truth. And so the house on the hill, emptied of its secrets, slowly fell apart, a symbol of a truth never written, a reminder of human choices, and a lasting question of why. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dark American history, subscribe, press the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next story.